Welcome, everyone, to episode 6 of Developer Dialogue. I'm your host, Jean, the Strategy Wargamer. I'm here with my dependable co-host, Matt, Historical Gamer, Eric, Tortuga Power, and we have a special guest. We actually have Luke Hughes from Burden of Command. If you guys are not familiar with this game, this is the most innovative strategy / RPG game that's coming up. And I'm very excited to have him on the show. We actually had him, I believe, 2 years ago on the show, but I believe it was on our Single Malt Strategy podcast. And I loved having him on. I've been following all your work, Luke, because all your developer blogs. What you're doing with this game I don't think has ever been done before, and that's why I'm very excited about it.
With that set up, I can only disappoint in this interview. So go ahead. Thank you. That was very gracious. Try to live up to it.
Yeah, especially after that thing that you posted today. I was kind of like, wow, you made my day. I had a really crappy morning. And then you published this developer blog of actual gameplay footage. And I was like, That made my Sunday. That just turned everything around. So thank you for that.
Made mine too.
All right. So generally the way, before we kind of dive into the questions and the core of the content, I kind of usually start off the podcast with, for those that are not familiar with Burden of Command, if you can give us maybe a 3 or 4 minute elevator pitch of what the game is and what the overall, objective of the game is.
I'd be delighted. So actually my background is Silicon Valley R&D and technology. So, I was beaten around the face and neck to learn elevator pitch. So I can't give my elevator pitch in one letter, but I can actually give it in one word. My elevator pitch is leadership. Now I'll give you the 2 word pitch, leadership RPG. And now I'll give you the sentence, World War II tactical leadership RPG. All right. So, of course, none of us know what the hell a leadership RPG is, but I'll give you a metaphor for it. What would it have been like to be Captain Winters from Band of Brothers? That's what Burden of Command is as a role-playing game. Now, if I put it in game terms for you, as opposed to sort of movie history, which is a central goal, then I would say think of it as like tactical RPGs, like story-driven RPGs like, Shadow Returns, Baldur's Gate, though not in the same style, but really any turn-based tactical RPG you could think of. But with the distinction that first we're doing leadership. What does it mean to lead on and off the battlefield? And of course, I can talk about that more. What is the burden of command? It's not a power trip game. You have a lot of responsibility for people's lives. So think of it as what 11-bit studios would call meaningful game, like This War of Mine, as another kind of metaphor, right? It wasn't fun being a civilian in Sarajevo, if you've tried that. I recommend everybody does. And, it wasn't necessarily fun or a power trip to be a captain in World War II with people dying around you, including your friends, or feeling that your bad decisions might kill people. So it's a pretty serious game. And then the last thing I think is worth drawing on, while it's not a war game in the normal sense of that, which is sort of a unit on a tactical map focused game, it does draw on that tradition, especially from the board game ones like the classic Squad Leader and later things like Steel Panthers and name your favorite board or non tactical game. We do draw from that, but we also draw from XCOM. We also draw from story-driven RPGs. And we also draw from a lot of reading by me and the team on what it is to be a leader, as well as outside experts, colonels, historians, so forth. So I could go on, but I did give you the longer 4 minute, but I hope I gave you the one word too.
Yeah, that was great. If I was a venture capitalist, you would already have my money.
Oh, please feel free to send any. That's okay. We promise to do wonderful things. No strings attached, of course.
So I guess my next question up is going to be, I know you answered this the last interview, but it's been so long and I kind of want to get this a little bit for myself. Where did the inspiration come up with for such an innovative concept? Where did it, did you just wake up one day and said, watch Band of Brothers, hey, I want to make a movie like this, but for the computer?
That's a fun question. And the story I find personally sort of neat in that I was planning, my intent was to do a lighter, really a war game, actually. I wanted to do some Panzer General Tactical. That was my original idea. And one night, I was sitting there playing Crusader Kings. And, funny thing about I played Crusader Kings in front of my wife, and she's like, are all these babies that keep being born? What exactly are you doing in this game? So anyway, I played Crusader Kings, and suddenly Ray hit me. I thought, what would it be like to take a family of officers, a band of brothers, across Europe? And so that essentially was how the game was born, right? Because Crusader Kings 2, as you probably know, is a historical role-playing game where you play maybe a duke or a noble or a baron, and you have your, well, I don't know if they're band of brothers. It might be band of backstabbers, typically. But but they are your band, and you have to make it with them. And so that was really the genesis of it. And the prism of looking at the game through warfare through leadership, or really humanity, is just powerful. In my own personal career, I was always interested in business and other areas, what it was like to be a leader. So it drew a lot on me. My father was a professional historian. He was a Pulitzer Prize finalist, so it's in my blood to take history very seriously. And then, I was always I always wanted to be a writer, and it was too hard. So the whole bringing the writers in and narrative side was fascinating to me. So out of a bunch of strings, and then always a great deal of respect for the military. My dad was a World War II vet, and one of my sons was an Air Force vet. My wife's Air Force vet.
Oh, wow.
That just brought a lot of things together for me, and I do feel we've attracted a lot of interesting people like vets and historians because of our commitment to this central moral issue, the burden of command, which I can talk about if you want.
Yeah, actually, you started to talk about this, and I think I kind of want to. This might belong somewhere in the middle of the interview, but I'd like to know what, in your opinion, or even how it relates to the game, but possibly not. What does it mean to be a leader? What is a leader in your game, or what does that mean for you?
Well, I'm gonna do a little Socrates here with you. Ray, my answer is what it means to be a leader is what do you think it means to be a leader? So our intent with this design is for you to explore what you think it means to be a leader. Now that was truly sort of sophist, so let me be a little more honest. Let's talk in the context of World War II leadership. There's no right answer. So that's where I do agree with Socrates, right? Knowing that you don't know the answer and trying to find your own is the key. But there are answers that are clear. So some people, which we tend not to admire, are careerists. Their notion of leadership is gaining more power, climbing the rungs. On the other hand, some of these very ambitious people, I suspect Caesar was pretty ambitious, did pretty well. So it doesn't preclude your being competent. And I'll put it in very burden of command terms now. So taking a hill is a moral thing to do, right? You've been ordered to take the hill. The moral argument for you doing that as a leader is you want the war to be done. You want to beat the Nazis. You want to get home, right? Because why are you fighting in this war otherwise? On the other hand, it's a pretty good moral thing to take care of the lives of your men. So maybe this isn't a hill to take. Maybe this is the time you call your colonel or your major and you say, sir, no, sir, or sir, we need to live to fight another day, or you don't even call and you back off. And the example I probably used last time, but many people resonate to, is Winters at the Canal, Captain Winters and Band of Brothers in 1945 probably, and he's just sent men across to grab a German prisoner, brought him back, did a great job, everybody survived. They tell the major or colonel, and he says, great, do it again. And Winters, who is one of the most sort of morally upstanding guys, decides this is not right, and he doesn't send them again, and he makes a call, which you could argue is not his to make, and doesn't send them again and lies on his report about having done it. So did Winters do the right thing? I think they set that up sympathetically enough that we mostly feel he probably did. But it's not obvious he did the right one. You have to think about it. And so what we try to do is take burden of command and fill it with a lot of decisions based on actual decisions from history preferred, sometimes from our writer's imagination, but typically from history, where you have to decide what kind of leader you're going to be. And we hope, this is one of the parts that's still remaining, you'll pick a particular journey of mindsets, as we call it, like compassionate or doctrinaire or aggressive, right? I forget the exact names. And those will give you certain benefits, but also certain punishments when you do it wrong. And you may know the newest Crusader Kings 3 has a wonderful mechanic called stress, where if you're a greedy king or whatever, and you try to be generous because you know as a player, I got to be generous here so I get all the people's adulation and I can get 2 more points, then your character will get stressed. And if you do too much stress, he may go mad. Now, I'm pissed at Crusader Kings 3 because Alan, one of our writers, had this idea. So we had it first, but we didn't get there, so our version doesn't matter. But with the same mechanic, which is we hope that what will happen to you is you will take stress if you decide who you are as a leader during the war, and as you to commit to being cautious, which might make you able to detect ambushes better, say. Then you want to do something aggressive because this is the time you realize as a player you really should be aggressive. We'll let you, but you'll take stress. So I hope you got the real answer, which is I hope you have your own leadership journey. And I do think Burden of Command may change your sense of who you are by the end. Certainly I have walked away from my experience with a few different ideas about myself from the decisions I made after being confronted with them, as opposed to judging at a distance.
Wow.
So, I mean, if you're trying to look at the day by day, I mean, like even the minute by minute decisions a leader can make, looking at it from a game perspective, I can imagine that the branching paths are just, it's impossible to iterate to actually script something. How will that work from a game approach? Are you guys going to have like just some kind of reactive AI that deals with the player's decisions or like generates new events based on some, I don't know, how will it all work? How will it be able to not be something that's, boring or not boring, but like repetitive? How do you make it so it's not repetitive? It's generating new, ideas based on the leader's decisions.
Excellent question. Now, the best answer to that, I think, which is not ours because it takes too much programming capacity in this first version, is something like Crusader's King, which has a complete model of the world, and you can make whatever the heck decisions. So they have scripted things in there, right? And then it has some outcome on the world, and then the world goes on its merry way. You ruined somebody else's life, or you raise them up as a duke, and the simulation takes over, and so it can handle a lot of variation. Now, we're more of a classic RPG, and all RPGs suffer from the branching problems you said, which is, if I give you two choices and you pick choice A, and then I give you really two choices from that, and then I give you two choices from each of those, you don't have to do much math, otherwise it's going to get out of control quickly. But luckily, Alan and Paul, so I'll give you our sneaky, nasty standard answer, which is very sneaky, and then I'll give you a slightly more interesting one. So Alan and Paul, from our Choice of Games background, those are interactive fiction games. I picked them deliberately because of their experience there. They know some tricks. So like most narrative parts of games, they come back to the same main path. But what they may do is change a few attributes or scores or gain you something or lose you something. But they pull you back. Now, we do, on the other hand, have some decisions that will stay with you long-term and have deliberate, and a writer's point, long-term implications. So we can do some of it. But yes, if you were to go into Burden Command and play it more than once, you would start to find elements of it repetitive, just like you would any classic handwritten RPG. So, there's an upside and a downside. We're not dynamically generated like Crusader Kings. On the other hand, you get to have a carefully crafted campaign like, Baldur's Gate. You couldn't do 6,000 different narrative choices. And I'm probably still true of their current one, that they've gotten really good at the Divinity style engine. Now, an answer to make you all happier is the tactical battlefield is a simulation, right? Like a war game would have. And what that means is if you make certain narrative choices, so you pick artillery the first time you play the scenario. We give you a choice. Of course, we're never going to give you an easy one. Hey, you got a little chance here, Captain. What do you want to do? We can get your artillery, or you can, push to get scouts out, or you can go back and beg for replacements. I'm making it up here, but we do things like that. Now, you don't get all of them, right? It wouldn't be a admiring, interesting decision if you could pick all of them. And in real life, probably usually couldn't pick all of them in time anyway, right? They weren't going to give you everything they had. So you picked, and you prioritized, and you argued. And that will change the battle. And the battle will be different for each of those choices. So where are the choices? Change the battlefield, and we go out of our way to try to give you the capacity and a writer's capacity to change the battlefield. And of course, the simulation takes over like Crusader's King, and it will make a difference. And we also can do things like, okay, you want that decision, that aggressive attack up the hill? Go ahead. We give it to you, but you are more stressed. And guess what? That will have implications for your character later. So the honest part is, I'm trying to be as honest as possible, is, of course, a lot of the choices are probably pseudo-fake, right? But most of them bottom out in some effect on an attribute or on your men or on the resources you have available to you. And so they change gameplay. And I'll tell you one more new thing since 2 years ago. This has been pretty exciting. This is a fun thing. So we're playtesters now. Very limited set because we're still pre-beta. But I had a conversation with last week, and they said, we love the events during the battle, meaning the narrative pop-up things that the writers do, and we want more. This was slightly a shock to me because one of my concerns for burden of command has been that, I want narrative at the beginning and I want at the end, but they'll be irritated by interruptions in the middle, right? Do I really want to hear about his lunch or his feelings about his girlfriend back in the United States in the middle of the barrage? Probably not, right? But they're saying they want more. Now, why do they want more? I was like, well, why do you want more? And they said, well, your events really connect to the battlefield. They make the battle more interesting. So I'll give you a concrete example. This is not really a spoiler because it's from a playtest scenario, not the main campaign. So the writers can do a lot of things with the engine. They can say, so I can give you concrete answers about what the game does now because it's mostly real now. They can say, hey, fire a barrage here or have this unit fire. They can do a lot of scripting through our fiction engine, which is based on Inkel's Ink. People did 80 days, etc. So they can they set up a barrage, which fires a real world event in the world. It's a friendly barrage. And no, it's airplanes, right? They send airplanes in, which manifests as a barrage in the battlefield. So you're happy, you're seeing a barrage. But then they sent the planes back again, and they started bombing friendly positions. And the narrative pops up and says, oh my God, what's happening here? The planes are bombing us, which of course happened, right? And I haven't had a chance to play that one yet. But you have some decisions to make and their consequences. And I think there's some burden of command moment, if I understand it correctly, where there are casualties. And now you have to decide, what are you going to do about these casualties? You're going to send a squad back, which reduces your battlefield capacity. You're going to ignore them. That might have some morale effect. Or you're going to send a few guys. It's kind of a compromise. So what we did there was we intervened in the battlefield through the fiction, through an event. And because writers can conjure anything with words, they conjure particular friendly fire things. I didn't have to go write the friendly fire airplane mechanic for the game, right? If they wanted, they could have alien spaceships land in the next paragraph. Of course, hopefully they won't, right? But they could. What we're finding is the narrative fiction side allows you to pop all the events you see in Band of Brothers. I was watching Band of Brothers a few days ago again, and about 50 or 60% is not on the battlefield, maybe more. We can do all that, right? We can pop anything we want there through the power of words. Now, we do have some limits in how we can simulate it, but we can do a lot.
My men frag me if I get too many of them killed?
Let me put it this way. If the writers want to do that, they can do that. So we track casualties, and they could say, hey, casualties are a certain level. We will trigger a destroy on, which is basically kill the unit, on any leader or unit if they want to. So just don't piss off the writers too much because they could do all that. And, I think the Vietnam campaign will be an interesting campaign, right? So they can do that. We've probably been a little nicer than maybe we should be in this first campaign. It's a little Band of Brothers-esque. Probably will be a little more infighting in the next one. But I don't think we have fragging, but we have some things that relate.
Piggybacking off your response there, I wanted to ask you, 2 years ago to today, what would you say in terms of development from our last interview to now, where the game went? Like, did it kind of follow the path that you kind of estimated for, or was it like a left turn, a right turn? It's like, well, we got to go do this, we got to do that.
Thank you. I love that question. I mean, because it's very interesting, the journey you go on, because you have an imagination in your brain, and then you encounter reality. Right? Like you date someone, you have some idea of what they are, you think they are, and then they're somebody else, right? And you have to adjust. And your world, and as Eisenhower said, you plan heavily for the battle. And then when the battle goes, you throw out the plan and you react to what's going on, which is a fancy way of saying, prepare, have a lot of things in your head, but then be reactive. So I think we can we can say we've been reactive, meaning I've been wrong a lot. But the strength of I hope I brought to bear from watching a lot of professional game developers' advice, since I'm still learning this, is listen. Listen to the players and react and try to adapt. Don't necessarily listen to their solutions, but listen to where they're finding problems, because you have a bigger context for solving a problem. So I'll give you an example or two. So let me see a fun one for you. I can give you probably 2 or 3 fun ones. First one. So I had a clever mechanic called friction. And the mechanic was, as you do things in the game, your leaders have orders. So let me give you a mechanical summary very briefly. This is a little bit, if anybody has played board games, there's a game called Fields of Fire where the leaders get a certain number of orders and they can command their platoon. So similarly, in Burden of Command, you get orders, you can command your platoon, but of course we don't give you enough commands to do all the things you wish you could do. As you do things, each turn dice are rolled, and you take friction. What is friction? Friction is basically, you're losing contact with your troops. Things are developing ways you didn't expect. I mean, go look at Omaha Beach and D-Day. Friction, right? Things don't go the way you expect. And so what does it mean in terms of command? The way the mechanic worked is you lose orders as time goes by. So you start with 4 orders. You could sort of command all your rifle squads in your platoon and do one extra cool thing if you were a young lieutenant. But now you're down to 2 orders. So what should you do? Should you stop and rest? And we called that assess. An assessment, regain for a turn. All those orders. But you can't do anything in that turn. So when's the time to stop? When's the time to take a pause? Now, we have a colonel, Adam Knapp, who is our head of playtesting. He said, I love seeing the friction in here. It's very realistic. So far, I'm telling you a nice story how I was brilliantly right? Well, here's the playtester feedback. One quote. I hate it. Another quote. I hate the friction. Third quote. I really hate the friction. So there's a pattern building here. So this is not really a surprise. I should have known better. There's a lot of game designers know this, and I kind of knew better when I did. People hate to be punished. So the classic example of this is, I think it was in original Warcraft, RTS, and there was some mechanic, and somebody correct me if you know the exact one, I may have it slightly wrong. There was a mechanic where if you stayed on playing too long, they gradually sort of reduced the effectiveness because they didn't want you staying on too many hours or something. I forget what their motivation was. They gradually reduced your capacity to do actions, rather similar friction. People hated it. So what did they do to solve it? They did exactly the same thing, but positively expressed. They reduced your average sort of things you could do in Warcraft. But if you chose to rest at a hut, which is what you had to do in the other one that they hated, you would gain actions. And statistically, it worked out to exactly the same thing in terms of how much on average you could have as a Warcraft player. But people loved it because now they were being rewarded for their decisions rather than being punished. Like child rearing, often in my view. I did probably too much punishment with kids, but punishment, it can work, but it's not the most effective. Carrot's usually a little better than a stick. So friction. Friction was carrot. Punish, punish, punish. Oh, look, very realistic, becoming more and more ineffective. And so we took it out. And this is one of the things we're reworking. People were thrilled when they took it out. They felt like they could get things done. We're going to do the opposite, which is I'll probably give them on average fewer commands. But if they choose to what I'm going to call plan as opposed to assess, because I think it'll be a little more so positive and give you the sense of forward. If they plan, they'll gain a big bonus of actions for the next few turns that will erode, right? So it's pretty much analogous to what went on with Warcraft, which is turn something negative into something positive that they're rewarded for making a choice, but statistically it comes out to the same. So that's an example, and I should have known better, but we've had to correct that. And the key was to listen. And the way we listen is we do surveys. People play scenarios and SurveyMonkey. We ask them quantitative, qualitative. We do live sessions where we get them on like this tonight. I'm looking at you guys. They play. And, we try to observe. We wish they could be in the office with us, but it's COVID, right? So we're no offices. And we do, sometimes they record them and we watch one of their video plays. So we do, and then we have a channel on our Discord where they can just type, hey, I hated the friction last night, or I love the new plan, or whatever they want to write at that moment. And then they talk and I try to listen. So I have one or two more examples if you want, but that's an illustration.
So one other question that I had was, so you published a developer blog today, and it kind of gave a little bit of a look on. So you had 4 units on the map. You had a LT, you had a rifle squad, MG, and a mortar squad, right? In this game, I'm going to be the company commander, right? From what I understand.
Right.
So am I able to control all of those units? Am I able to tell the LT where to go, the rifle squad where to go, and the other platoons as well?
Yeah, that's a great question. And your leadership journey will be a little more complicated than that, but yes, you will be a company commander. You made an observation. You liked its simplicity. You're not controlling 30 or 40 units, et cetera. That's correct, by the way. As a company, U.S. company is basically 4 platoons, each of roughly 3 squads. I'm simplifying. So it's about 12 units. And then the LTs, lieutenants, 4 lieutenants is 4 platoons and 4 LTs. And so whatever that is actually, I guess, about 16 to 17 when you add it up, if you're in charge of full company. And typically you'll be up against something on that scale. Because RPG, right? You don't want to have too much going on so you can start to connect to your particular squads, and in particular to your particular lieutenants. So I deliberately made a design decision early on. You'd only have roughly 4 main leaders around you and yourself, so that you could really get to know Dearborn and Thompson and Stern and the other leaders in your command. Just like an RPG, if I gave you 20 characters for Baldur's Gate, I don't think you'd connect to them that much. There's a reason RPGs give you 4 or 5. Now, a rogue company, the sergeants are incredibly important, and the other NCOs, right? And there's executive officers and all kinds of stuff. But we bend but don't break history. We do simplify the structure because we want you to make that connection, because real company commanders did make that connection, emotional, the good ones, to their men like winners. And so we have to limit how many people. So first, it is limited to that. Now, you asked, am I command of all of them? That was a tough decision. Part of me wanted to, I was very tempted to do sort of autonomous AI, meaning, hey, you give orders and you hope the lieutenant does everything. That would certainly be more realistic. But this is a game design issue, which is every time you take away control from people, you're asking them to hate the game, right? So when you do friction and you take away their capacity to command, they're not happy. And so I'll give you another example. There's a wonderful board game out there called Band of Brothers, where you morale check every time you give them an action command. I think it's quite realistic, right? If they're under any kind of stress, ask them to do something, they might not, right? This might be the time they don't. I designed it originally that way in an early version of Burning Command. Highly frustrating. Damn it, excuse my French, man, just walk up the road. Would you, squad? I'm sorry you rolled a 1 in 10. Could you just walk up the road? Very realistic. And it didn't represent they're saying, no, my representative didn't get the order, or there's a little lag, or there's order confusion. Very realistic. In fact, again, some vets say, yeah, realistic. But man, as a game, it's a hassle. So what I did instead was listening to myself in that case, like I wasn't enjoying the game doing that. I said, no, it's not going to work, right? So people need control. So what I reduced it to was what I believe are the 4 core, I think it's 4 or 5, morale checks that I believe the literature supports really are the vital ones. And so there's a book called Brains and Bullets, now reissued as War Games, I think, War Space Games, by Leo Murray. And he's actually the co-author. He was under a pseudonym as Dermot. And Dermot is advising us now. He says the core sort of things when people might refuse orders are order them to assault, because nobody wants a bayonet in the stomach, right? It's a pretty big deal to ask people to go fight hand to hand. And I can give you some statistics around this, but I'll just summarize them. So that's a big one. So in Burden of Command, you ask somebody to do assault and you don't bolster them, which is a leader command. You don't put a leader there to help them decide to go die for you. They might not. Definitely happen in the war. Another variation is have them run out into the open, into known threatened hexes. So there's an excellent tactical World War II account called Battle Hardened. It's a captain. Really good if you want to understand how captain command on the battlefield. And the book starts with him standing up and ordering the men to run across the open field where the German machine guns are zeroed in. And he looks back, and he's a great captain. Nobody's following him. So then, very sneaky, the writer. You spend the next 300 pages wondering, what the hell happened? So only on page 300 do they tell you. I still want it. But anyway, so another one is you order men to run out into the open. This is less threatening than running into assault where they know they're really taking big risks, and they may refuse your order unless you bolster them. Other ones are if they get shock, which is when you discover the enemy has a weapon. Everything I'm telling you right now is in the game. Okay, so like a couple of years ago, I've been waving my hand. Right now, I'm telling you things are in the game. So you go read Brains and Bullets, something called weapon push, weapon pull, which is, hey, people hate scary damn things showing up to kill them. So what does that mean? They discovered late war, the Brits, they had tough, hardcore German paratroopers in the village. And, they're going to have a fight because German paratroopers were tough. They would parade a flame tank in front of the paratroopers, and it would show off its nice flames and give the paratroopers some time to think about, well, do you really want to burn to death for the Fuhrer here? Strangely enough, I'm being laughing, but really, So they would put up the white flags, these hardcore paratroopers, and surrender because you gave them a choice, like which do I really want to do here? Now I have a choice. And so we have shock. which is when units see horrible things like, oh my God, the Germans have artillery. Inversely, if you release artillery onto the enemy, it's kind of like a fireball on a fantasy game. Every German unit in line of sight to that artillery barrage, the first time it happens, takes shock, which is a psychological effect. Nobody's getting hurt, but they're all saying, holy crap, I'm being hit by serious artillery. I'm going to be suppressed, and maybe I want to surrender or run away, right, in this, depending on my morale. So I could go on, but basically, another example of people want to be in control as players, so I decided not to take control away generally, because it's too frustrating to us as humans, even if it's more realistic. But I want it first to be a successful game, as long as it doesn't violate history. And then I'd like to get across these things like, yeah, you aren't always in charge, and sometimes they will make decisions in their self-interest. And of course, you can guess the writers go to town on having fun with you're not always being in charge narratively. Dearborn always thinks he knows better than you. So you may have to struggle a little bit with Dearborn as your lieutenant to make things work out. And do you want to be a hard ass with him, or do you want to go along with it? When Stuart shows up in your lee, how tough are you going to be on Stuart at Gettysburg, etc.?
So I do have one question. I mean, obviously, this is a game about managing your company or whatnot,
Yes.
Since you're a captain. Presumably, the casualties are somewhat dynamic, right? Your actions lead to certain people dying or not dying. So
Yes.
when it comes to, I'm assuming there's an element of replacements, like you'll get replacement soldiers?
Okay, so excellent question. Go ahead. Did you want to finish?
Well, I was just going to say, like, addition to that, assuming there are replacement soldiers, like, is there a finite number of characters who are going to be like filtering into my company? Can I get them all killed and then just end up with all green replacements? Who, like, how do you manage that? Especially if, like, I'm assuming some of these replacements have sort of scripted backgrounds or stories or whatnot, as you're talking about, or how do you manage the narrative of like the new guys that are coming in, and maybe the story for someone else was going to progress a certain way, but they died. Like, how does that all factor in?
Now, the tough question comes. It is kind of a tough question. Comes from the guy who's not showing his face.
Poker face.
I don't have a camera on my desktop at home. I legitimately don't have a camera.
I can say, Sean, I'm going to ask him this question. He's going to squirm so bad, so I'm just not going to be in the camera. So it's a good question. And the answer is, yeah, there are limits. Right. So again, honesty in advertising. So if this were Crusader Kings, we could just regenerate, right? Or Darkest Dungeon. Darkest Dungeon thrives in constantly recreating new characters and is thrilled to kill them all for you, So we, on the other hand, are doing story driven. So we cannot handcraft an endless supply of new, interesting background, LTs, etc. So there is a limit. Now, one way we could approach that is plot armor, which means, hey, you can't kill characters, right? So that's what they do in certain games where they need these NPCs to continue. You can't kill them. It's just bad things may happen. They don't die. In our game, there is no plot armor except for Sergeant Grant, who really isn't on the battlefield. He's kind of the voice of the men and so forth, and we felt it was useful narratively to keep him around. So there's a spoiler. But, doesn't really change the game. But everybody else can die. Okay, because how could you do burden of command, the burden of lives, if people can't die? So you can get killed. You can get your LTs killed. You can certainly get the men and the platoons killed. So the intent is for it to be permadeath. So, yes, the game will decide at a certain point, if you continue to get LTs and so forth killed off, that the game is over and you have lost. Because probably at some point you might be relieved, if you were such a butcher. Now, maybe you were a successful butcher who took hills and you wouldn't have been relieved. But we can't be that effective. Someday we'll do a Darkest Dungeon Burden of Command, which will be procedurally generated. That's one of my ambitions. And will allow you to kill them infinitely until we decide you really should be relieved. But then you will have a weaker narrative because it's not hand written. So the upside is you get a handwritten, carefully thought out, good feedback. We've done a lot of playtesting around the narrative, story and things going on that connect to what really happened in the war. And people can die, but not as often as in a real war. And let me speak briefly to that. So combat mission, I know you had the combat mission designer on. Well, years ago said no link campaigns. And they had an excellent argument, and the short version was, said this before, but some of the listeners may be new to them, was, hey, officer casualty, especially junior officers, is very high in World War II. And therefore, it's unrealistic to do a series of linked campaigns maintaining the same LTs. And they are absolutely right. On the other hand, I would say that it's the physical truth and not the emotional truth. The emotional truth of leadership was, yes, physically they died, but emotionally they had time to connect to their men because they spent many, many hours talking to them, like watch Band of Brothers. There's a lot of time not in the battlefield, right? Warfare is a lot of boredom followed by periods of sheer terror. So my feeling was the emotional truth we could do on Bird in Command was lower the casualty rate so that you can experience the connection that they really would have had. Now, the only alternative otherwise would be just hours and hours you're sitting around eating food together. You're right. We can't simulate it. You wouldn't want us to. So my point is I would defend Bird in Command as being realistic, but emotionally realistic, not physical casualty realistic, while still recognizing physical casualties. And if you insist on running yourself or Dearborn or name your lieutenant in front of the machine gun in the open, you will die. But we make the odds lower than historical. For you. For your men are a little harder. But, compromises of trying to pull off a narrative RPG realistically where the casualty rate was high.
I feel like so many war games go the opposite side where casualty rates are absurdly high compared to history. But
let me speak to that. You get me excited. So, brief is, casualty rates are actually much lower than most war games. Most war games and most games in general are bang, 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 shoot, 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 they're dead. I can think of a lot of tactical war games that were pretty much that way. I fire enough, they're dead. Right, or maybe they run off, but they're dead. Now, in real combat, from what I've read, and, things like the brains and bullets, hey, you're in a stone building, I shoot at you a lot. Do you just die? No. You get down behind the stone wall, and the bullets bounce off the stone wall, and maybe you stick up your head occasionally, or maybe you just put the gun up and fire above, right, because you don't particularly want to die. So, in that case, or, hey, do you surrender? No, you don't stand up and surrender because they might shoot you down when you stand up surrender. So the smartest, safest thing, keep your head down. And if you're, good vet, you probably shoot, get down, go play paintball sometime. You're not at risk in paintball, and yet everybody does that, right? They don't even want to be hit by a paintball. Think about how they think about a bullet. So my point is casualty rates were actually quite low in World War II overall, 8,000 bullets before you had a casualty. And casualty doesn't mean death, it just means wounded. Artillery is a little different. There's a lot of subtleties to this, but our casualty rates are much lower than a typical war game. I'm glad you brought that up, but probably a little lower than let me say it better. We cover from 1942 to 45. In that time, probably most of junior officers in a standard infantry company would have died, right? That was the reality. Band of Brothers, they don't all die because it's a paratrooper regiment and they're pulled out a lot, a company, pulled out of warfare a lot. So they survived better because they were good quality, and also they weren't in constant grinding attrition warfare as the standard GIs were. So
what, like a 10-month campaign as opposed to a three-year campaign?
Exactly. Right. So, really all your NPCs in this game should be dead by the end of the war if we did it strictly on a physical basis. But on an emotional truth of the connection they would have made, any real lieutenants would have made to the men if they survived past the first day or two, we do capture that. So I would defend what we did. But you can also attack it on the way I described.
You get promoted?
All right. You get a spoiler today. You're the first people I've told you that, but I hate not giving honest answers. Short answer is you start as an LT, even though you could end up a company commander, and that's all I'm going to say. Go buy the game eventually.
I forgot what my other question was, but I'm interested in this fact that the player's character can die. It's kind of interesting. I like this. Most games have losing conditions. For the player character dying, are you an entity on the battlefield? Is it mainly that this kind of almost like total war mechanic where you want your leader closer to the front because you add morale to the troops around you, but that also makes you a little bit more susceptible to dying? Or
Eric, I'm so glad you asked that question. That's an excellent question, really, because strangely enough, I've never been asked that. And yet that is core to the game. So the game is, remember I said the design was leadership was the one word. I tried to obsessively, everywhere I could, think leadership, always. Like on the narrative, I can talk about what we did on that side. But on the tactical battlefield, your kingpin pieces, your queens of the battlefield, are the leaders. Now, exaggerated, right? because it's a leadership RPG. And also, maybe the sergeants were more important, but I like to think of the NPCs as sort of the abstraction of the leadership of the platoon. So no offense, as Sergeant said, or we have some combat vet sergeant several on the team, et cetera. So, no offense to their roles, but it's an abstraction. So the leader's role is trying to say this well, is what's the term, game design term? It's all resource limited. So you have a certain amount of orders, as I call them, which are reaction points for the leaders. They can activate squads in their platoon, but they can do critical leadership actions like bolster. Bolster is essentially what you were just describing, but you have to pay for it, which is the leader has a dramatic, significant, I should say, morale effect on the squad he's with. You're the captain, guess what? It's better, and you can do some better things in certain ways. And that unit will fire better, move better, and pass morale checks better. And one of the interesting, let's go back to learning. So when I first did the game, I designed it very consciously for the leaders to be critical to succeed. And lo and behold, we put the playtesters in, and we discovered that they weren't using the leaders particularly. The only way they were using the leaders was as essentially activation pools. Oh, I'll activate in our squad. Because, of course, I want these units to go fire. Obviously, what I want to do is fire my rifle platoons, my machine gun. That's the way I win. But the design is actually, no, the way you win is you use the leaders. I'll give you a concrete example. Go into a firefight. Don't use a leader. You're up against German squad in woods. You're in something similar. They might be better trained than you. If they win initiative, they'll suppress you before you can fire. And you will do poorly, right? And even then, it's sort of a crapshoot. You just want to go in and have a shoot-off with somebody else. Who knows who will win? Put a leader in. Leaders, getting men motivated. Watch Winners and Band of Brothers, right? Gets the people going. Gets them firing more often than they would. There's a lot of studies showing the leader nearby makes soldiers fight more, right? Because it's like human nature. The boss is around. I want to do better. So if you want to win a firefight, start with the leader bolstering your unit. And then you will establish, what do they call it? I'm forgetting the term. Fire advantage. You're establishing fire superiority. That's the term I'm looking for. And now you start winning a firefight. And now you're suppressed as a unit. Now you're in a position to flank. But if you want to flank, you might have to go a good distance, and you might have to cross the open. You want to cross the open, you're going to take a morale check. Better send a leader, because the leader will make the morale check pass if you bolstered and spent one of your orders to make that happen. But as you alluded to, Eric, guess what? You want to lead from the front, do brave things like that, you will be open to death, right? Because you're up in front of the fire. So if you want to be good command and control, maybe you should stay back. If you want to be up front, being bolster fire effective, you better be up there with them. And by the way, you'll build trust, which is one of the key RPG attributes. They see you putting your ass on the line. This one is not in the game yet, but it's the RPG side we still got to get to. But it will be in. You gain trust, and your building influence morale go up. On the other hand, you're like a late Battle of the Bulge, Lieutenant and Band of Brothers, and you kind of hiding behind the haystack. The men notice, and you won't have trust, and that you won't be able to compel them on the battlefield. So, short answer is yes. We try to put you in a leadership tension. Should I stay back for command and control, or should I be up front? And even if I'm not dying up front, I'm getting suppressed. The Germans are firing. I'm getting suppressed. As I get suppressed as a leader, my orders go down. So to put that in game mechanic terms, I have 4 orders. I'm suppressed from 10 morale to 5. I'm 50% less effective. I have 2 orders instead of 4. Maybe I should get out of there so I can become effective as the men. Am I doing right by the men by staying up front and looking heroic? Maybe I'm not. Maybe they really prefer I was back there with enough commands to make the flanking happen. So our intent is to cause those tensions. But the playtesters weren't picking up on it. So we realized, in our realized Luke screwed up again, is we weren't communicating. We weren't communicating that leadership is central on the battlefield. So after we did our first core cotton baler scenario, we went back and said, why'd they do so poorly? Because they did poorly. Not because they're not smart. It's because I did a lousy job in, setting up and training them. So we went back and we put in a bunch of tutorials to teach them interactively. And here's what the game is novel for people. First, leadership, right? Most games don't push leadership as a central mechanic on the battlefield. And, I'm overstating. Secondly, they weren't used to this notion. They just can't kill by shooting. So they're like, oh, there's a minion, meaning enemy squad. Bang, 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 bang. I should be able to kill it. Well, damn, I'm just not doing anything to it anymore because the enemy's down behind the stone wall now, highly suppressed, but not dying for them. So they had to learn 4 Fs, which is find the enemy, fix him, which means put a lot of firepower down on him, flank him, and finish him, which means you have to close the assault and hope they surrender, which they typically would if you'd suppressed them. And the game is heavily 4F designed. You must do classic infantry tactics to succeed, kind of like Brothers in Arms first-person shooter encouraged. John Antle, who was executive producer for that, is an advisor for us, by the way, now, which is a great honor. The number of things we've discovered they didn't understand because we weren't communicating. It was different in the game. And I summarize them. You must use leadership on the battlefield to a fault.
So Burden of Command 2 will just be Burden of Command 2, Lord of the Rings, and you'll be Gandalf, and you'll have to lead all the... I feel like those books are all really about leadership. Like, it's just about, like, following around a group of, like, superhuman leaders.
I have to go. I read that 7 times as a kid, so I'm a geek.
Oh, wow.
Oh, my God, I have to go get rights for Lord of the Rings, the leadership RPG. I'm sort of laughing.
Burden of Command 2, the Battle of the Pelennor Fields. And then you just follow around all the major characters who are leading, soldiers in combat. And, the Nazgul show up. And then you got to bolster your men with Gandalf, to convince them not to run away from the Nazgul. And you're good.
Games like Field of Glory get that across. The leadership, especially in the Ancients, was very important on the battlefield. Alexander the Great, I remember, he was at an Indian city, and he was late in the campaign. Nobody wanted to be in an Indian campaign anymore. And he gets up on the wall, and they're not following him because they're sick of it, frankly, even though they love Alexander. And by God, Alexander jumped off the wall into the enemy city by himself. They went, oh my God, as they should, and they all charged in to save him. And the guy was insane. He was down there fighting everybody by himself, and they ran in to save him. That's the story. So now there's an example of lead by example.
Wow. So I want to kind of move on to
Lord of the Rings. My God, that's great.
I'm surprised you read that 7 times. I got stuck halfway through Fellowship.
I'm leadership obsessed, I guess.
I have not read it 7 times, but I've read it maybe twice all the way through, and then also the Silmarillion.
Oh, wow.
Now you're pretty hardcore. I think I managed through the Silmarillion once, but that was a bit of a slog. So I never said that. It was fantastic.
No, it's a slog.
It's a history textbook, but I'm okay.
I'd like to shout out for Battle Brothers. Does a great job of a morale-driven battlefield. I can't remember how much they do leaders, but man, they're great. Somebody gets killed in the battlefield, everybody freaks out, around them, and it's just great. And that's the kind of thing we're striving for, because even in modern battlefields, morale is still fundamentally important.
My men will be like, thank God.
I actually was going to ask that question too, but it's funny you mentioned Battle Brothers because for some reason that also came to my mind. I was thinking, what are the games that have like a pretty severe battlefield mechanic for morale? And definitely Battle Brothers.
Oh, well, you want severe battlefield mechanics? Please go visit one of the things I always look at, Darkest Dungeon.
Yeah, I played that one too, but that's too much of a grind.
Battle Brothers is really good. I also think Fields of Glory, 2 was, did I get it right? Fields of Glory? I feel like I'm...
Yeah, Fields of Glory, that's right.
Fields of Glory 2, a heavy amount of morale influence.
Okay, you're provoking. All these things have one mechanic, which I don't. I've always found troubling to as a player. So this is not really like an experience question, but maybe hopefully it's not too selfish of a question. This percentage chance to die thing, where it's the XCOM effect, I think, like where you have this one chance to win or lose the battle based on a single die roll. And for people who are like more into statistics and all that, I feel like you understand that a good game should be a progression of percentages that all influence each other, but at no point in time should there be one percentage which is just you win or lose based on one die roll. Even if maybe that's even not a good thing to say, because people would argue in real battles there may be a pivotal moment which everything hinges on. But it's just a little frustrating. Let's say this, your leader dies, right? You have a chance to either go and bolster this squad or not. And you're like, okay, a 35% chance. But if I don't do it, I feel like I'll be in a slightly disadvantaged position. So I'm going to take that risk. And it's just a game because I'll just restart, whatever. And you do it and you die. the downside of this is that it kind of your story's over. I mean, this is you should disincentivize people from choosing obviously this choice that leave or die.
I never nowhere said that death was the end of the game.
Oh, okay, this is good. That's potentially good then. Yeah. So then I was also going to ask.
I'm not promising you that if you kill everybody everywhere, it's going to continue because we can only do so much. Casualty is not death, right? Okay. So, of course, we typically. Well, let me be careful here. So I want to say very clear on where it's real and where it's still waving hands. Now I'm in the waving hands part, which is what we're doing in the Link campaign. We have written all the narrative. We have the battles designed. We have individual battles running. We don't have the RPG linked yet, where these issues will really beat us up, like you just brought up, right? Like, guess what? With the current numbers, every LT is dead by scenario 3 if you're 18, right? That's kind of a problem. But we have choices. So first, we can lower statistics. Secondly, we will certainly do things like you'll be a casualty, not dead, which was more often than not if you got hit, and you will be out of the battle for that battle. So normally the decision is, you're taking a risk where you may be off the battle the rest, which the battle may go very badly. You definitely could lose the battle because of that. But lieutenants and captains did lose a battle. This is not a power trip story where you have to win everything, right? You don't. Sometimes you might decide to retreat. So you may make a choice. It may lead to losing a battle. And yeah, that's part of your story. It did lead to losing a battle, and that's the way it went. But it's not over for you. It's just meant that it's not Panzer General, where you lose one battle, it's over. Because that's not the way it worked. You might get a reprimand, but they might even give you more resources because you're a screw-up, and they need to give you more. The elite guys, like the paratroopers, the irony was they did a great job, so they got less.
Yeah, that makes sense. That's good.
So I want to kind of ask this one question that I had on, this is one question I wanted to ask you, I guess, since you announced this, I think it was about a year ago. So,
I'm going to be honest here. Go ahead.
So about a year ago, you kind of blew my mind when you announced that Shane Taylor, the actor that played Eugene Rowe on Band of Brothers, if you guys are not familiar with Eugene Rowe, he was the one that the medic in the Battle of the Bulge episode. You announced that he's going to voice the lead character in Burden of Command.
So he's leading the sergeant, who's the immortal guy, because we can't kill off our, not cheap Band of Brothers actor. Plus, we want our best voice talent around. Has nothing to do with money, of course.
So I'm kind of curious, how did all that? How did that all come together? Because I'm like, how?
Because I'm an manipulative business bastard. I came out of a business background. I was a research guy. I worked for Accenture, and so I got a lot of exposure. And I had some exposure to marketing. I personally thought it'd be exciting, but I also thought, my God, if people knew we had a Band of Brothers actor doing a voice, they'll be pretty interested. And guess what? They were pretty interested, like you. So it was absolutely a marketing maneuver, deliberately, but not venal. We're not tricking people. We're doing something we thought they would enjoy. So how did it come about? We were extremely fortunate that we got interested. Our audio director, Maurice Suckling, who's a veteran in the game industry. He's also a game board designer. He's also game prof. He's also a writer. He's disgusting. So I don't like talking about him too much because he's so damn talented. But he had connections and knew this game. And we decided we were going to do voice, be over ambitious. We do only for the barks in the battlefield, not the whole narrative. We can't afford that. But we do about 70% of the barks right now are voiced. And so he knew how to sort of pursue it. And we did a pretty systematic process, which is we went and tracked down every Band of Brothers actor we thought we'd have any shot at. And then we started asking, and people were interested in what we're doing. The pitch is simple. Leadership RPG. We have we tell people like that, we're a professional historian. John McManus advises. We have vets on the team. They see we're serious about it the way Band of Brothers was. And they were interested to some degree, so he was one of those interested. We're extremely privileged to have him. Oh my God, what a quality professional. And then we had him basically come into a studio in England, and we, recorded in a studio in England because he's English. You'd never know it. Comes across as American. He's English. Shows you his talent. He came across as Southerner. I mean, how about that? And, and then we have his recordings. And we did a lot of others off Well, I won't go on. There's a lot of detail, but if you want. But basically, we did go chase him down with a lot of persistence and people who knew what they were doing, like Maurice. And also, we have Chris Scribner, our audio director, who's a composer. He knew a lot about this. So I'm just fortunate to have these people who know a lot more than I do about these things, who've often given more generously than they perhaps should to the project to make things like this happen.
Yeah, that was definitely that was definitely huge news. I was kind of surprised and stunned by that.
I keep wanting to go get more, but I do have to look at the budget. Oh, it's got to be fun to get more, though.
I wonder if the actor that plays Captain Winters would be interested.
Yeah, well, I would take my budget times some large multiple to afford him. He's amazing. Oh, my God, great actor.
So I know, obviously you guys haven't announced a release date or anything like that yet, so I'm not going to ask you that. But do you have a year in mind?
Well, I probably told that story, but I always like a chance to make fun of myself. So in my infinite naivete at the beginning of the project, when we announced, I think it was honestly in 2017, embarrassingly, I said this will be out in 2018 in the video, first teaser video. And more veteran people in teams said, don't do that. Don't do that. Unannounced a date. And no, I know what I'm doing. We can take that hill. I know what I'm doing. So, of course, I didn't know what I was doing. And we didn't take the hill. And so I had to eat crow, at the end of 2018 and basically humble pie about don't follow my leadership on this part. So I will never give you a date till I'm pretty confident of it again. So you can ask here, and I will give you the standard answer, which is Burden of Command will be done when it's done right. On the other hand, I can give you a less BS answer, which is, it's not really BS, but the real answer is I can give you the roadmap where we are. Where we are is the narrative's done. Tweaking, but it's done. It's beta. I think that's a better term. Narrative's in beta. All the scenarios are kind of in alpha, various stages of alpha. They are sub-designed. We have a few that have been through playtesting now. We're marching through that. What the AI's, most of the tactical's done. There's been 2 new feature developments, so I can talk about it. Pretty fun. If you want to hear about them, that I still want to do. But it's mostly done. Art's mostly done. Audio's mostly done. The remaining big chunk is primarily armor, which we're going to do lightly. Because it's just a whole nother. We're not going to do Steel Panthers as a mini game, and this is an infantry combat. But I love in a future campaign to do it more seriously. Armor, stringing these things together in the RPG side, confronting things like the brutal question from Matt about, to a high casualty rate for leaders and how I screwed up on that one and what I'm going to do to fix it, and balancing it. So that kind of is a main RPG is a big core chunk. The really exciting news is early on, they hated the interface, despite my best efforts to be smart about the interface. But I listened hard, and I can tell you some of the problems you want there. But now they're radiant. Good, because I've listened and reworked. The experience they're giving us, we do a scale sort of 1, which is, God, it's boring as hell, to 5, it's riveting, and I can't put it down. And we're getting typically now 4+, which means it's engaging, which is all you can really hope for. So we think we're on a successful journey here now, where if we can persist, it will be a good game. But we have to do a lot of work still to glue it all together. But you can play the core experience now. So they're playing narratively integrated tactical battles with a still bit thin enemy AI, and they play the battle, and they seem to be liking it, thank God, because we've listened a lot.
Oh, that's exciting.
Yeah, it is exciting. I'm excited, but still a long journey. But feel like we can get there now. Some of the early ratings were depressing. Like, there's some great game design quote out there, which I wish I could dig down again, which is something like every game design starts ugly, and then you spend the rest of development making it a pretty baby, right? So same here. It started ugly despite all the grand dreams. And man, a lot of feeding, a lot of changing diapers here. A weird metaphor for Burden of Command, but a lot of diaper changing. You can quote me now. And it's getting there. It's starting to be a 3-year-old running around, charming when it's not destroying a house.
I'm kind of curious, how many people do you have developing behind this game?
It's a complicated answer, but the short version is we're something like 4 full-time FTEs, but more like 16 people distributed, because it's a lot of volunteer people working. I'm pretty much full-time, one or two other people kind of full-time. But mostly it's part-time support and distributed across the world. So it's a lot of work. I have to play project manager in a pretty complicated situation with people not working full time. but they persist, right? So we get there. But you should think of us, a different way to think about us is we're kind of 1.5 programmers, right? Which is a core element to move the engine along. And this is an overly ambitious game. One of my mistakes, right? It's got a narrative engine that can trigger things in a battlefield, gives writers a lot of control, but it's written for writers to do in an inkle so they can do good fiction. And it's got a tactical battle engine that's rather novel, we think. Just a lot of overambition, getting the barks in and the voices and everything else. So it's a long journey, but we're getting there.
I'm kind of curious, and I'm assuming this is not going to be on release, but do you think down the road, like a scenario editor would be possible?
So modding, I'm a big fan of having modding. I would love to see the campaigns people would do with this. So in the first release, we have our modding tools, but they're not going to be friendly, right? Like some of them are Excel spreadsheets and so forth, to set up scenarios. Some of them are nice. There's a tiled map editor. But my first ambition after release and it getting into decent shape, or fixing all the things people tell us we have to fix then, is to focus on modding tools so people can then create their own campaigns. We will, of course, continue to create our own, but there are an enormous number of leadership journeys and small unit accounts from World War II, from all the different nationalities, from World War I, from Spanish-American War, from Korean War. We believe the engine probably can do things from about World War I up to Vietnam. After that, it would start to get pretty dicey. But that's a pretty big space for telling the stories of all those people who served.
Since you mentioned Vietnam, I want to kind of piggyback off that question because I believe in a pre-show you mentioned Vietnam. So would that be the next logical step after World War II?
My thinking and hand-waving is that we will expand in time backwards and forward. So first, we'll expand within World War II. So we'll probably do something like Commonwealth campaign, some sort after American. Then we'll probably do Soviet and German, which will probably piss off people on all sides of the spectrum as we try to tell the complicated truth as best we can, while many people tell us we fail. But we'll do the best we can. And then we'll expand then there's the Pacific, right? And then you can move into the 30s, Spanish-American War. I think it's very fascinating. Remember, when I say fast, I mean more than tactically, right? This is not a war game. It is a leadership RPG. So what about all those people who went and joined the leftist Lincoln Brigade, and like George Orwell was in the Spanish Civil War. And Hemingway was over there observing, and maybe some recent accounts involved in some of the attacks that see in some of his books. And what a fascinating narrative story to tell. I mean, sometimes journalists would go upstairs and watch the fight from Madrid, and write and go downstairs and wire the story in. How weird is that, right? So, and then, the Italians and Germans are involved. So you can see it's very interesting. But when I say interesting, I mean humanly, narratively interesting. The people involved, the issues involved. Similarly, Soviets, there'll be a different leadership experience being a Soviet campaign where what if you were a commissar? Or, what if the order is shoot your men if they retreat? Because it was pretty effective order because people thinking, well, maybe I will stay and fight if I'm going to be shot if I leave, Stalin's famous order. And I'm no expert, so maybe it didn't work. But the impression I have is it did have an influence in making them continue to fight. Brutal, undemocratic, probably effective, I'm guessing. So that's a different campaign, humanly, narratively. What if you were, a hardened communist or somebody who wasn't a communist but still feels you should fight for the country? On and on and on. So then we expand the other direction, gets us to the Korean War, which I think is a very interesting war that's not gotten enough attention. And you've got United Nations forces. And then you expand back towards World War I, which is a very different kind of combat. And, we had a wonderful 1917 movie. So there's some sense of how brutally compelling that can be. And one of my personal heroes is Wilfred Owen, the poet. Died at 18, or I'm not sure exactly. He died in 1918. The lieutenant in the war, a really deep soul. Read his poetry, but he was a good leader and died with his men. In World War I, a lot of good people died. It's brutal, like any war, but especially brutal. What's that story? What's it called? All Quiet on the Western Front. Different kind of story. Notice I didn't say different kind of tactics, though it is different kind of tactics, but it's also a different kind of story. And by the way, I would encourage listeners and you guys, please give me your suggestions of interesting campaigns you think we should do. And what I mean when I say that is, Tell me a campaign, but ideally tell me a Band of Brothers like small unit account that covers the characters. And so there's a reason Band of Brothers covered the Band of Brothers, the Easy Company, because there was a wonderful historian's account that covered the characters. So that's what I'm always looking for, is those personal, detailed accounts that cover the characters involved, because that's the kind of story we want to tell. Well, we want to tell credibly on a battlefield, but we also want to tell credibly off the battlefield, like Band of Brothers did.
Yeah, I feel like, the Northern Europe campaign of 44 to 45 is particularly suited to a narrative approach, because in a lot of cases there were individual units that would, participate from the start through to the completion of the entire campaign. And so you can sort of tell this epic story from start to finish without it becoming overly cumbersome. To your point, like 42 to 45, every lower level officer's probably either been promoted out of a company or is dead. Yeah. So it's a little bit more of a challenge. I'm really curious to see how you guys do that. I think the Pacific has some unique challenges because, and I think the Pacific HBO series showed it as well, is that it's hard to give that same scope of start to finish of the war, because no one unit landed on most. There may be like 2 or 3 islands for an individual unit at the most, and that doesn't really tell the entire story of the Pacific. It was so sprawling. There were so many different units involved. There were so many different engagements, and so you don't have that same narrative arc. So I wonder if you're looking at the Pacific, do you just tell like a story of an individual company that might have been on Guadalcanal for most of Guadalcanal, but that's all you look at, right? As opposed to the entire theater.
Well, that's a smart answer, and that's, I think, one of the ways we'll go, which is, bridge too far. That's really one battle, but what a story! Oh my God! I mean, I would love to cover the British paratroopers in Arnhem. Man, what a story! 3 days, just very intense, very detailed. 3 days at Arnhem. What would you have done, right? Or, Stalingrad's another obvious one, begging for that kind of coverage. So, or the Monte Cassino in Italy. So there's nothing about Burden Command that says you need to cover multiple years. In fact, the reasons you just argued, arguably gets more unrealistic for most units, the more years you cover. Though, of course, it's compelling to tell an epic multi-year account. But if you rate, like you followed a German unit from 39 to 45, maybe you might get one guy who made it all the way, but it'd be pretty brutal. So
yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of ways you could do it. But I would argue, like, for the same reason you mentioned Market Garden as being a great opportunity. I agree with you 100%. I think if you look at Close Combat, by far the best campaign of Close Combat was the A Bridge Too Far campaign. And the reason for that, in my opinion, was it was a tight, focused narrative that took place over a couple of days. So the sort of the limited scope of the units, the limited geographic area, the interlinking geographic sections on the map made a really compelling campaign. Whereas I think the Eastern Front, I think it was Close Combat 3, which looks at the Eastern Front. It frankly, it kind of, you were fighting over a lot of the same maps. It was over such a huge period of time. The unit scale didn't really feel right for the Eastern Front. The likelihood of you carrying troops over from Barbarossa through the war, like it didn't have that same compelling narrative, I don't think, that you could tell with Close Combat, where you really do grow attached to that one mortar that just saves your bacon every single time, or that one guy who seems to always come up big and all of a sudden he dies. Like, that means something there in a way that just I don't think works from if you're trying to tell the entire Eastern Front.
Close Combat is I'm glad you brought it up. That I should have given them acknowledgement early on. They did psychological battlefield early on. Men panic, morale is important, get suppressed. They did an excellent job. So you pointed to what we're trying to emphasize, right? We're taking the point that people liked, but didn't quite succeed in the sense that I read repeatedly, and I really enjoyed that game. I played it quite a bit, was, I just started to get attached to, because they wonderfully named all the riflemen, right? And sergeants. I just started to get attached to Sergeant Johnson. He died, right? Which might be credible, but destroys that RPG connection experience. And so what we're trying to do is, in some sense, the opposite. We want you to focus on that. We want there to be a tactical battlefield experience. We want it to be psychologically credible. We want you to do the 4 Fs I alluded to earlier, but that's not the point. The point is that leadership journey of you and your men, especially articulated through the NPCs and your own moral and tactical choices across the battle for Europe as a winner's equivalent, as who you would be as winners. That leadership journey and the burden of command, that's what we're focused on. And I, again, will defend it as credible in the sense, even though the casualty rate, because emotionally, leaders did get connected to their men because they spent a lot more time than we will model. So we give them a better chance to survive, to capture that emotional truth, which most war games, which have been fine, I've played war games all my life, I love them, don't capture because they have a different mission. They're trying to express the battle. We care about expressing the battle, but we're not a war game. We're a leadership RPG.
I got two questions left on my list here that I want to kind of probe into a little bit. So you guys are making this engine, and you were mentioning that you're probably going to make DLCs and covering other wars. I'm kind of curious. I know you're releasing on Windows. Is there a possibility for like other platforms like Mac or Linux, or even possibly mobile?
No, mobile. I don't see that happening. We are Python-based, crazily, which opens the door to Mac. And now, every time I listen to talks on this, and I think it came up in one of your interviews, actually, the developers say, oh my God, what a mistake. I think Ezra was talking about that, and I think he came up with, maybe it was kind of a mission, but every time I hear an experienced developer talk, they're like, oh, be very careful. So Linux, what I've heard, for instance, Linux has an enormous number of variants and breeds. So you spend enormous effort to handle all the variants, and then they're still pissed at you for the one variant you didn't handle that they own. So dangerous territory as a developer. They're not grateful, not that they need to be grateful, but you get what I mean. And on Mac, I love the Mac. I came from that background originally. But it's kind of a business decision on how much our sales are, how much work it would take. And so I think you should think of this as a Windows game. I'm not closing the door on Mac, but we're small. You should think, do you want us doing a Mac version, or do you want us putting more campaigns out, right? Or do you want a dynamic campaign where you can play as long as you can manage, and it's generated on a battlefield of Europe, kind of like, think, what if we could do a Crusaders King-esque thing, right, in the spirit of that, not as grand, but, you would be we would pick kind of like Steel Panther's dynamic campaign, if that means something to you, did, right? We could do something, or the campaign series did. You could do something like that. I'd love to go there. But if you tell me to go do a Mac, I'm putting more time onto the Mac, right? If everybody wants Mac, then that. So it's no choice is free.
And my last question is, I kind of added it toward the end of that last one, but I think 2 years ago, I might have asked you this question 2 years ago about mobile, and I forgot how you responded. But why do you feel like the mobile market would not be a good fit for this game?
I speak ignorantly, but my sense of it is twofold. One, from a business standpoint, people will not, you probably know this, right? They won't pay a premium price for games in that market because they've been conditioned by phone apps that cost $1 to $3, whatever they cost these days. So, they're like, what the hell? Why are you charging this much money? And if you lower the price, and the people on the PC say, well, why are you giving him such a good deal? You know what? Am I a bad person for buying the PC? And then secondly, it's just a very different game context, right? The screen sizes are different. The coding environment's different. So very non-trivial. And remember, we're a bird's eye battlefield. So we're not first person running around close up, which maybe would be more credible. You need to see a lot of hexes at once to sort of plan your platoon's movement. I think that would be pretty impossible on a phone, maybe on an iPad, and then we get very little money off doing it because people be ticked about the price point. So it just sounds like business and technological effort. It's not going to pay off. So I could be wrong, and we'll look at these things again. But for reasons if anybody wants, I'll say, we didn't do it in Unity. We don't have a wonderful engine that will pop it into mobile, but that's a fantasy. Pop it into mobile, and then you have all kinds of interface issues you have to work on, even though it quote unquote popped into mobile.
I guess that's it from me. That was a great response. I've been getting that from pretty much all the developers, and I mean, it's unfortunately, it's the reality, and kind of sucks, but it is what it is. I'm always on the go, especially watching the kids and stuff like that, and phone is pretty much with me all the time. I kind of want to open up.
You've heard, I try to be honest about things and not tell you what you want to hear often, right? So yes, the campaign will end if you get your characters killed too much. Yes, we probably won't do mobile. And then I hope you'll believe me when we tell you some of the good things. Go ahead.
I just wanted to kind of, I guess, ask you if you had anything that we didn't cover that you might want to mention.
Oh, yeah. I'd like to just talk about one last fun thing because I think it's really interesting. So and also I think it's kind of a cool term. Well, one of the last features I want to do on the battlefield is not on there yet, is what I call trust armor. What the hell is trust armor? So I was reading a 82nd small unit account of this guy, Medal of Honor winner, who survived. He wrote from all the way to Berlin, Megalis. And he was one of these guys, war is very complicated. You get some people who find their meaning in life in war, not because they're weird, sadistic guys, but because, they live for that moment where they feel they're contributing to something important, like Winters probably felt, but he never wanted to go to war again, right? But he might have been, I shouldn't speak for Winters. I back off him. I don't know how much he felt it was meaningful for him because he wanted to go back and farm. But Megalis, said he really, he found his calling. So it's not a story where everybody hates war and is awful. There's like Storms of Steel, World War I. This guy was a very effective German lieutenant captain, and he seemed to find his meaning in it, but not perversely. On our hand, there are lots of awful stories. My point. So I'm reading his small unit account. He's 82nd Airborne, and they're at the River Wall, WAAL. I'm probably mispronouncing it. These guys get in these boats. They know there's all kinds of German machine guns. This is during the Bridge Too Far campaign. And forgive me if I get it slightly wrong, but this is the spirit of it. They get in the boats and they have to cross under heavy machine gun fire and all kinds of things. And it's horrific. I mean, they're getting cut up. They're getting, brutal. And then they get across and they keep going. And they get across and they run across fields and open fire. And they beat these guys. And they really thought they had no chance. And when I was sitting there thinking, if I do that in Burdened Command? And the depressing part, I was thinking, wow, I couldn't do that in Burdened Command. Because in my model, you take fire and you suppress. Which means when there are lots of bullets snapping around you, you want to keep your head down, right? Like my Stonewall stories. And when you're suppressed in Burdened Command, you don't want to move. You don't want to fight, right? You're keeping your head down. But these guys weren't keeping their head down. Yet they were taking fantastically huge fire. So obviously, Burdened Command model is wrong in this regard. So I was thinking, what am I missing here? Where have I blown it in my Burdened Command model? And I kept noticing these very interesting comments as I was reading it really closely, trying to figure out what's going on here. Why are they doing it? Why are they standing up to this fire? He kept saying things like, I was so angry. I really wanted to get to these Germans who'd killed my friends and kill them. Not a nice sentiment, right? But very understandable. And he alludes in other places, like, I had this rage. And I thought, what I'm not capturing, I'm sort of capturing fear, because my background's psychology. I had a psychology master's, and then I did an AI PhD with human-centered, and I paid a lot of attention to motivational systems. I was covering fear. Suppression's fear. Not craven fear, but sane fear. I'm going to get down behind a wall because I don't want to die. Right? Because that's how, if you were designed to stand up in front of bullets, you wouldn't last very long. So even the elite get down when the bullets pop. But what it turns out is there's another motive, right? Which is aggression. So, you want to get those bastards who've hurt your friends. So you want to beat them. You want to beat the enemy that invaded your country. You're a Pole and you go to England, you want to get them because they just invaded and took over your country. Aggression is a very important motivation to take great risks. And another variation of that is you have a great leader. Winter stands up. Remember that scene? All his men are on the ground in front of the machine gun fire, and Winter's running around and kicking him in the ass, literally, I think. And they get up and they follow him because he's a great leader. That's what I'd call trust armor, which is they do it for him and they do it for each other. And also because they want to be good people. They know they should be upcharging, and he helps them do it. Right. So shame, aggression, trust, motivate people to, this is the mechanic now. The mechanic is shrug off suppression. In other words, the fire comes in, you make a morale check, and you throw off suppression. Now, Luke's sitting and saying, oh, look at this great mechanic. But I never said original. Sadly, anybody who plays board games, embarrassingly, probably Squad Leader was doing this 30 years ago, 40 years ago, whatever it is now, right? Which is you fire a unit, makes a morale check, no effect if you don't hit it. I'm referring to the board game. And most computer games actually do the opposite. They're kind of like me. You take suppression, and so forth, or you get wounds. So I am, for the experienced troops, I want to put in as your units gain experience. They will start to shrug off suppression like the 82nd Airborne did, right? And what you see in the veteran troops and elite troops is they stick their head down, but then they put their head back up and shoot, right? And then they put their head back down. They keep fighting because also they're not scared like they were because they're used to the battlefield now. You grow used to horrible things. They grow used to the battlefield. So your veteran units, your units in Morocco will be suppressed. The Vichy's fired them. Oh my God, we're under fire. Everybody panic. But as you get later in the campaign, they'll gain experience. And I hope they'll have trust armor from your leaders and in their own experience. And they will do heroic things, right? In the sense that you will send them across the battlefield to take the bunker where the guys aren't getting suppressed in a bunker because they're veteran too. And so you have no choice but to take risks. And the trust armor will save you and get across. But, of course, if the dice go badly and the machine gun bullets hit, they may get cut down. But they will go across the field for you. And the offside, if you really want to put these poor bastards who fought so long for you through that, maybe you have to. Burden in command.
Wow. That's, I think, a perfect place to stop the interview. That's perfect. Wow. So... wow. So I don't even know how to follow up on that. That's really an amazing mechanic that
hand waving right now, honesty, but intended. Go ahead.
No, I mean that's an incredible mechanic. I mean, I didn't even think of that. I mean, that's going to be incredible. That's why I feel like this game is going to it's going to revolutionize the way we play strategy games. Because I mean, I don't, like I said earlier before, I don't recall any kind of computer game that I ever played, or even a board game that I've ever played that kind of models all these different choices that a leader has to make. So I'm dying to get my hands on it. I'm very anxious for it to come out. Matt, do you have anything you want to say before we finish up?
No, I just want to say thanks, Luke, for for coming on again. I know we chatted a couple of years ago, and it was really enjoyable, and I think you shed a little bit more light on what you guys are working on. I'm excited to see what comes of it. And I just can't wait to get our hands on it.
I'm still full of passion for it, even after all these years, and it's starting to be pretty real. So that's pretty exciting.
Well, I'm going to be looking forward for early access. I'm going to be the first one that drops down the dollars. But thank you for coming on.
We made a sale.
Yeah, exactly right. But yeah, thank you for coming on the show. Follow your dev blog, so keep them coming. And thank you.
Thank you.